Fourth Wing, Chapter 1. The wing you didn't know you had. It's strange how most of us go through life believing we're flying with all we've got, only to discover years later that we've been gliding on three wings. The fourth, it's there all along, folded tight against our side, waiting for the moment we dare to stretch it out. I didn't understand this until a conversation with a friend who had just gone through a divorce. We were sitting at a little cafe, the kind with chipped ceramic mugs and a chalkboard menu that never changes. She was stirring her coffee long after the cream had dissolved, staring into the swirl as though she could read her future in it. I thought I was complete with him, she said quietly, but now, I feel like I've been missing something my whole life, and it's not him, it's me. I didn't realize it then, but she had just described the essence of the fourth wing. It's not about someone else completing you. It's not about adding more money, more success, more approval to your life. It's about finding the part of yourself that has been quietly dormant, the part you've either ignored or never noticed. For me, the discovery came during a season of my life when everything looked fine from the outside. My job was steady, my friendships were intact, my health was, well, manageable, but something in me had gone flat. I wasn't unhappy exactly, I was unlit. The truth is, many of us live like this. We don't crash dramatically, we don't spiral into disaster, we simply drift, mistaking absence of pain for presence of joy. And here's the problem. You can fly for a long time on three wings. You can navigate the world's expectations, keep your relationships afloat, and appear together. But you'll never feel the exhilaration of full flight until you find and unfurl that hidden wing. The fourth wing is different for everyone. For some, it's creativity. For others, it's a spiritual awakening, a newfound courage, or a willingness to be radically honest with themselves. For years, mine was my own voice, my ability to speak truth without softening it for everyone else's comfort. Growing up, I had learned to be agreeable, to smooth over tension, to avoid saying anything that might upset the fragile balance in the room. I was praised for being mature for my age, which is really just another way of saying I knew how to disappear in plain sight. But disappearing is exhausting. You can't spend your life compressing yourself into shapes that fit everyone else's frame. I didn't realize how much of me was missing until the day I finally said something out loud that I had been holding in for years. The relief was so intense it felt physical, as if I'd just unclipped a weight from my chest. That was the beginning, the moment my fourth wing twitched awake. When you think about a bird in flight, there's a symmetry that's both beautiful and necessary. The wings must work in harmony, each providing balance and lift. Now imagine one wing not fully opening. How much harder the bird has to work, how much less control it has in the air. We live like that. Compensating, overusing one part of ourselves because another part is tucked away. Maybe your compensating wing is your intellect, so you overthink to make up for lack of trust in your instincts. Maybe it's your ambition, so you push harder and harder to fill the silence left by a neglected inner life. I want you to know there's nothing wrong with the wings you've been using. They've kept you aloft. They've brought you this far, but imagine what could happen if you let all of yourself take flight. The discovery of your fourth wing usually doesn't arrive in fireworks. It arrives in whispers, a thought you can't shake, a longing that doesn't fade, a sense that something is waiting for you in a corner of your own soul, but you're not sure how to get there. There's a story I once heard about a woman who inherited a locked chest from her grandmother. For years she kept it in her attic, assuming it was filled with old linens or family keepsakes she didn't have room for. One day she decided to finally open it. Inside was a perfectly preserved wedding dress, her grandmother's, and tucked into its folds was a letter she had written to her future granddaughter. The letter spoke about courage, about choosing love over fear, and about never forgetting that beauty exists even in the hardest seasons. The granddaughter realized she had spent years storing away something priceless without even knowing it. That's the fourth wing. It's the thing you've been carrying without recognizing its worth. And when you finally unlock it, you realize it has been waiting for you all along. The trouble is, most of us fear the moment of unfolding, because as soon as you extend that hidden part of yourself, you're visible in a way you weren't before. You can't hide in the old patterns. People will notice the change. Some will celebrate it. Others will resist it, especially if your hidden wing challenges the role you've been playing in their lives. When I began speaking my mind more openly, I lost some relationships. Not because I was cruel or reckless with my words, but because I was no longer willing to shrink to make others comfortable. And for people who loved the smaller, quieter version of me, my full wingspan was intimidating. That's the risk of flight. You will leave some people on the ground, but here's the truth I wish I'd known sooner. Those who truly love you will not just tolerate your fourth wing. They will cheer for it. They will say, "I see you," and mean it. Finding your fourth wing isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. It's the moment you stop flapping wildly just to stay in the air and start gliding with the full strength of who you are. And when that happens, life feels less like survival and more like the kind of freedom you didn't realize was possible. If you're reading this and thinking, "I don't know what my fourth wing is," I want you to start by listening. Not to everyone else's noise, but to the subtle hum of your own life. What keeps tugging at you? What makes you feel like time has disappeared when you're doing it? What truth do you keep swallowing because you're afraid of how it will land? The answers aren't loud. They're patient, but they're persistent, and once you start to recognize them, you'll see that your fourth wing isn't missing. It's just been waiting for your permission to open. Years after that cafe conversation, my friend called me. She had taken up painting, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. Her apartment was now filled with canvases in every stage of completion, and she sounded lighter than I had ever heard her. "I think I found it," she said, "the missing part." She didn't need to explain. I knew exactly what she meant. Because once you've felt the fourth wing unfurl, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. If you let it, this will be the beginning of the most honest chapter of your life. Not the easiest, not the safest, but the most real. The world doesn't just need people who can fly, it needs people who can fly with all their wings. And your fourth one is waiting. Chapter 2, trusting the stir. The first time you feel your fourth wing stir, it will feel like a ripple under your skin. A quiet but undeniable restlessness. You won't be able to name it at first. It's like catching the scent of rain on the air before the clouds even form. You just know something is coming. For me, that restlessness began on an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk at work, going through the motions, checking boxes, answering emails. The room was silent, except for the tapping of keys and the occasional sigh from a co-worker. On paper, it was a good day. Nothing bad had happened. But as I sat there, I felt this strange combination of boredom and urgency, as though I was wasting something I couldn't afford to waste. That's the thing about the stir. It rarely arrives in moments of chaos. More often, it appears in the quiet, in the in-between spaces when you've run out of distractions. And because it's subtle, most people ignore it. We tell ourselves it's just a mood, or a mid, after, noon slump, or the result of not enough coffee. But deep down, we know it's more than that. The stir is your fourth wing, stretching for the first time in years, maybe decades. It's your inner self whispering, "We could be more than this." Not more in the sense of constant striving or endless achievement. More in the sense of depth, connection, and truth. But here's where it gets tricky. As soon as you notice it, your mind will try to talk you out of it. You'll remind yourself that you should be grateful for what you have, that you have responsibilities, that now is not the right time. You'll tell yourself you're too old, too young, too busy, too entrenched in your current life to make a change. And if you're not careful, you'll believe it. That's why trusting the stir is the first and most courageous step toward finding your fourth wing. Because to trust it, you have to believe that your inner life has a wisdom your outer life hasn't caught up to yet. A friend of mine, Daniel, once told me about the summer he first felt his own stir. He had a secure corporate job, a good salary, a predictable routine, but he couldn't stop thinking about photography, not in a casual, wouldn't it be nice kind of way, but in a way that kept him up at night. Every evening after his long commute, he would watch videos about composition, lighting, and editing. He began carrying a second-hand camera everywhere he went, snapping photos of alleyways, sunsets, and strangers on park benches. One night over dinner, he told his wife, "I don't know why, but I feel like I have to do this." She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "Then maybe you should stop asking why and start asking how." That's the shift. Trusting the stir means you stop interrogating its right to exist and start making space for it. When you first start listening to this inner pull, you might feel like you're betraying something. Your career, your relationships, the version of yourself you've been presenting to the world. That's normal. We're taught from an early age that loyalty means staying the same, even when we've outgrown the shape we've been living in. But here's the truth. You're not betraying anything by growing. You're not abandoning your life. You're expanding it. The people who love you may not understand at first. Some will feel unsettled by your shift, because your stir will stir them too. They'll be forced to consider the places in their own lives where they've been ignoring their fourth wing. That's uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the first sign of transformation. I remember when I started writing seriously for the first time. I'd always loved words, but I'd kept that love in a private, almost secret corner of my life. When I finally began to share my work publicly, a co-worker pulled me aside and said, "You're not quitting your job to write full-time, are you? That's risky." She meant well, but what she didn't realize was that I wasn't chasing risks, I was chasing alignment. Trusting the stir doesn't mean you make reckless decisions overnight. It means you acknowledge that the stir is real and worth honoring, and then you take small but deliberate steps toward it. For me, it was setting aside 1 hour every morning before work to write. For Daniel, it was taking a photography course on weekends. The key is not speed, it's consistency. Think of the stir like a seed. You don't plant it one day and expect a tree the next. You water it, tend it, and protect it from the voices, internal and external, that will tell you it's not worth the effort. One of the most dangerous things you can do when you feel the stir is to wait for certainty before you move. Certainty rarely comes first. Movement does. It's in the doing, the experimenting, the small acts of faith that clarity begins to form. If you wait until you have all the answers, you'll still be waiting a decade from now. The fear that comes with trusting the stir often boils down to one question: what if I fail? But here's what I've learned. When the stir is real, failure doesn't look the way you think it will. Even if your path doesn't unfold exactly as you imagined, the act of pursuing it will awaken parts of you that would have stayed asleep otherwise. You'll gain skills, insights, and connections you couldn't have predicted. And more importantly, you'll know you honored yourself enough to try. Failure isn't trying and falling short. Failure is ignoring the stir until it disappears, leaving you to wonder what might have been. One of my favorite stories about trusting the stir comes from my grandmother. She had always wanted to learn how to play the piano, but was told as a child that lessons were too expensive. She carried that desire quietly for decades, raising children, working long hours, never making time for it. At 71, she decided she was done waiting. She bought a used upright piano and hired a teacher who came to her living room every Thursday afternoon. She practiced every day, her fingers slow but determined. By the time she was 73, she could play with both hands, read sheet music, and even perform for her church. I thought I was too old, she told me once, but the truth is, the only thing I was too old for was not living. The stir is the invitation. Trusting it is the RSVP. You don't need to know where it will lead. You don't need to have a grand plan. You just need to say yes in small, tangible ways, over and over again. Your fourth wing doesn't unfurl in one dramatic motion. It opens feather by feather, moment by moment, choice by choice, and every time you honor the stir, you're strengthening it, making it impossible to fold back in. If you're feeling the stir right now, here's what I want you to know. You're not imagining it. You're not selfish for wanting more. You're not ungrateful. You are alive, and the fact that you can feel this longing means there's still so much of you left to live. You don't have to leap today, but you do have to listen. And once you start listening, you'll notice something magical. Life will begin to meet you halfway. Doors will open. Opportunities will appear. The path won't always be smooth, but it will feel unmistakably yours. Because once you trust the stir, you're no longer just moving through the world. You're flying toward the person you were always meant to become. Chapter 3, Weathering the Turbulence. The first thing no one tells you about finding your fourth wing is that the moment you start to rise, the air will get rough. I wish I could say it's all smooth skies from the moment you trust the stir, but that would be a lie. The truth is, once you begin to stretch into the fullness of who you are, you will disrupt the air around you. People, habits, and even parts of yourself will react, and that reaction will feel a lot like turbulence. Think about an actual bird taking off from a branch. For a moment, everything is motion. The beating of wings, the shifting of air, the leaves shivering in the wake of movement. Flight is not gentle at the start. It is messy, it is loud, and yet, without that messy beginning, the bird will never reach the smooth current high above. The same is true for us. When I first began honoring my fourth wing, speaking my mind, pursuing my writing, allowing myself to show up in my relationships without editing who I was, I felt a rush of freedom, followed almost immediately by a wave of resistance. Some of that resistance came from within. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being selfish? Was I risking too much? Was I abandoning the safety of what I'd built for something unproven? Other resistance came from people I loved, not because they wanted to hurt me, but because my change forced them to confront their own comfort zones. One friend joked, "Oh, so now you're a writer." She said it with a laugh, but there was an edge to it. And here's where turbulence does its most subtle damage. It makes you second. Guess your altitude. It tempts you to fold your new wing back in, to go back to the familiar branch where no one questions you. I had to learn something vital during that season. Turbulence is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're moving. Think about an airplane. The pilot doesn't turn the plane around every time they hit rough air. They know turbulence is part of the journey. They adjust, steady the course, and keep flying. When your life starts shifting because you've found your fourth wing, turbulence might look like criticism from others, doubts in your own mind, sudden obstacles, or unexpected detours. None of those mean you should give up. They simply mean you're passing through an unsettled layer of air on your way to clearer skies. One of the hardest forms of turbulence is the loss of relationships that can't hold your new altitude. I remember a close friend from my 20s who had been my confidante for years. We bonded over shared frustrations, late-night conversations, and our mutual tendency to downplay our ambitions so we wouldn't disappoint anyone. When I started pursuing my writing more seriously, I noticed a subtle shift in our friendship. She stopped asking about my projects. She changed the subject when I brought them up. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But over time, it became clear. My growth made her uncomfortable, and instead of flying alongside me, she chose to stay on the ground. It hurt. But here's the lesson turbulence taught me. Not everyone is meant to join you at higher altitudes. Some people belong to a certain chapter of your life, and when that chapter closes, their role does too. Turbulence also comes in the form of self-sabotage. When you're entering new air, part of you might panic. You'll procrastinate on the very thing you claim to want. You'll fill your schedule with distractions. You'll convince yourself you're not ready yet. This is normal. Your brain is wired to seek safety, and safety often looks like sameness. Even if the old branch was uncomfortable, it was familiar, and familiarity can feel deceptively safe. When I caught myself sabotaging my own momentum, I started using a simple question as a compass. Is this action taking me closer to my fourth wing or further away? If the answer was further away, I paused. I didn't shame myself. Shame is just another form of turbulence, but I did make a conscious choice to steer back toward the path I wanted. There's another layer of turbulence that doesn't get talked about enough, the loneliness that comes when you're between the life you had and the life you're building. This in-between space is tricky. You've left the familiar, but you haven't yet fully landed in the new. Your old habits don't fit anymore, but your new ones haven't become second nature. You may feel like you're floating without a flock. This is where patience becomes your co-pilot. You cannot rush through this phase without losing altitude. You have to let your muscles strengthen, your wings adjust, your confidence catch up with your new reality. The good news, this loneliness is temporary. The more you fly, the more you'll find others who share your skies, people who understand your language, who see your fourth wing and aren't threatened by it. When turbulence hits, I remind myself of a hiking trip I once took in the mountains. The trail was steep and the weather changed without warning. Fog rolled in, the wind picked up, and for a while I could only see a few feet ahead. My instinct was to turn back, but something told me to keep going step by step. When I finally reached the summit, the wind died down and the fog lifted to reveal a view so breathtaking it almost didn't feel real. Had I turned back, I would have missed it entirely. That's what turbulence is. It's the fog and the wind, not the summit. It's temporary, and if you keep moving through it, you'll reach a place where the air is still and the view is worth every uncertain step. There's a quiet kind of confidence that comes from surviving your first season of turbulence. You start to realize that you are capable of holding your course even when the air shakes. You stop interpreting resistance as a stop sign and start seeing it as a milestone. The next time the air gets rough, you think, I've been here before. I know how to keep flying, and that knowing changes everything. If you're in turbulence right now, I want you to remember this. The goal is not to eliminate the bumps. It's to learn how to fly through them without folding your wings. You will lose some people. You will question yourself. You will feel uncomfortable, but you will also grow stronger, braver, and more certain of who you are. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the turbulence didn't stop you. It shaped you into a flyer who can handle whatever air the journey brings. Chapter 4, Riding the Currents, the most surprising thing about flying with your fourth wing isn't just the power you feel in your own body. It's discovering that the air itself will help you. If you've ever watched birds from the ground, you might notice a moment when their wings stop flapping and they simply glide. They're not fighting the air, they're letting it carry them. Those invisible streams of lift are called currents. Birds find them, trust them, and ride them for miles without exhausting themselves. In life, currents are the unseen forces, people, and moments that align with your new flight path. They're the opportunities you didn't see coming, the conversations that change your direction, the inner breakthroughs that make you realize you're capable of more than you thought. The challenge is, you can only catch these currents once you've left the ground. When I first started honoring my fourth wing, I was prepared for the work. I expected to have to push, to hustle, to flap constantly just to stay in the air, and in the beginning that was true. But after months of writing every morning, after weathering criticism and doubt, something shifted. An editor I'd never met stumbled upon one of my essays online and reached out with an offer to publish it in a magazine. That piece led to another, and then to speaking invitations. It wasn't that the air had suddenly become easier. It was that I had risen high enough to catch a current I didn't know was there. That's the magic of the fourth wing. Once you're in motion, the world begins to meet you halfway. Currents often appear disguised as chance. A stranger you sit next to on a flight who introduces you to someone in your dream industry. A book you happen to pick up at a library that contains exactly the sentence you needed to read. A casual conversation that sparks an idea you can't shake. Skeptics call it luck. I call it alignment, because the truth is, these moments were always there. You just couldn't see them from the ground. They only become visible once you've lifted yourself into the altitude where they exist. Daniel, my friend from Chapter 2, had a perfect example of this. He'd been steadily building his photography skills for a year, taking classes, shooting every weekend, posting his work online. Then, one afternoon, while photographing a local street fair, he struck up a conversation with the event organizer. That organizer happened to be looking for someone to shoot promotional material for the city's cultural festival, a job that paid well and would be seen by thousands of people. Daniel got the job. That gig led to referrals, which led to a full-time photography career within 2 years. If you trace it back, the current wasn't luck. It was the result of him already being in motion, already flying, so that when the opportunity crossed his path, he was ready to ride it. The other thing about currents is that they require trust. You can't ride one if you're clinging to the branch you just left. This is where many people struggle. After turbulence, there's a temptation to go back to constant effort, to flap as hard as you can because you don't want to fall. But if you never pause, never look for the lift that's trying to meet you, you'll exhaust yourself long before you reach where you're meant to go. There's a rhythm to sustainable flight: effort, then glide, push, then receive, and here's the part most people miss. The gliding is just as important as the flapping. It's in those quieter stretches that you gain perspective, that you can spot the subtle shifts in the air, that you can see new possibilities. I once heard a mentor say, "Stop trying to make everything happen. Start letting some things happen to you." That doesn't mean passivity. It means allowing space for life to surprise you. It means trusting that you don't have to control every outcome for good things to arrive. It means understanding that some doors only open when you're not banging on them. This is hard for those of us who have been conditioned to believe that worth comes only from constant productivity. But catching a current often requires stillness, not the stillness of doing nothing, but the stillness of paying attention. Currents aren't always external. Some of the most powerful ones are internal. You might wake up one day with a sudden clarity about a decision you've been wrestling with for months. You might realize that something you thought was essential no longer matters. You might feel a quiet but certain pull toward a new direction, one that makes you feel lighter just imagining it. These inner shifts are currents too. They move you forward without force, carrying you into a new phase of your flight. But there's something important to know. Currents can also carry you in the wrong direction if you're not paying attention. Not every opportunity is meant for you. Not every invitation is aligned with your fourth wing. Some will look tempting, maybe because they offer quick validation or material gain. But if they pull you away from the truth of who you're becoming, they're not your current. They're a crosswind. I learned this the hard way when I was offered a high-paying corporate writing job that would have taken me away from the personal projects I'd been nurturing. It was flattering, and it would have made my bank account very happy. But when I pictured myself taking it, I felt a subtle heaviness, like I'd be folding my wing just to fit into the role. So I said no, and 2 months later, I was offered a book deal. That no was what allowed me to catch the right current. There's a phrase pilots use when flying gliders: stay with the lift. Once they find a column of rising air, they circle within it to gain as much altitude as possible before moving on. Life is like that. When you find a current, whether it's a supportive community, a surge of creative energy, or a project that lights you up, stay with it. Milk it for everything it has to offer before you go chasing the next thing. Because here's the truth, currents don't last forever. They shift, they fade, they lead you into new air, but each one you ride takes you higher than you could have gone on your own. I think of my grandmother again, the one who learned piano at 71. For her, the current was her teacher, a patient, encouraging woman who believed in her ability even when she stumbled over every note. That current carried her far enough that she could eventually play for herself without guidance. That's what currents do. They don't carry you the whole way. They carry you far enough that you can soar under your own strength. By the time you've caught your first few currents, you start to realize something. The sky is full of them. You're not in this alone. The world is full of invisible support waiting to meet you, but you'll never find them if you don't lift off in the first place. So when you feel that upward pull, whether it's an idea, an invitation, or a quiet knowing, lean into it. Trust it, let it carry you higher than you thought possible, because here's the beautiful thing about flying with your fourth wing. The more you trust the air, the more it will trust you back. Chapter 5, The Horizon. There's a moment in every flight when you realize you're no longer just flying towards something. You're flying within it. In the beginning, your focus is on the mechanics. You're learning how to stretch that hidden wing, how to trust the stir, how to weather the turbulence, how to catch the currents. Every day feels like work, like conscious effort. But if you stay in the air long enough, something shifts. One morning you look out ahead, and instead of seeing a specific destination, you see nothing but open sky. It's breathtaking and disorienting all at once. That's the horizon. The horizon is not a finish line. It's the endless edge of possibility. It's the place you reach when your fourth wing is no longer something you're trying to use. It's simply part of you. When you arrive here, you've already proved to yourself that you can take off, survive storms, and rise higher than you once thought possible. But now comes a new challenge, learning how to live in the vastness without losing your direction, because the horizon is wide, and in that width lies both freedom and temptation. The first time I felt this horizon phase in my own life was after I had achieved a handful of goals that once felt impossible. I was publishing regularly, speaking at events, hearing from readers all over the world. The air was smoother now. I wasn't fighting for every bit of lift. I had learned how to ride the rhythms of my own flight, and yet I felt a strange sense of uncertainty. I had spent so long aiming for those specific milestones that I hadn't thought much about what came after. That's the first truth about the horizon. When you arrive, your old map becomes irrelevant. Living in the horizon means you're no longer confined by the edges you once believed were fixed. You start to see new possibilities, projects, relationships, places, versions of yourself that you couldn't have imagined before. This sounds wonderful, and it is, but it also requires you to navigate without the familiar boundaries that once kept you on course. Without those boundaries, it's easy to drift, to say yes to too many things simply because you can, to fill your days with movement that looks like progress but isn't truly aligned. The horizon asks you to choose your flight path with more intention than ever before. One way I learned to navigate this vastness was by asking myself a different kind of question. In the early days, I asked, "What will take me higher?" But in the horizon, I began to ask, "What will take me deeper?" Because once you've tasted real flight, the goal shifts from altitude to depth. You stop chasing the next visible peak and start looking for the kind of experiences, work, and relationships that will root you in meaning, even as you keep moving forward. I saw this shift in Daniel too. After building a thriving photography business, he found himself booked solid for months. He was making more money than he ever had, and his work was in demand, but something was missing. I realized I was just producing. He told me one afternoon I was creating beautiful images, but I wasn't connected to them the way I used to be. So he began turning down certain jobs in order to focus on projects that told meaningful stories, documentaries about local communities, portraits of people who were rarely in front of a camera. His income dipped for a while, but his fulfillment skyrocketed. That's what choosing depth over constant height looks like. The horizon also teaches you about pacing. In the early stages, there's a rush to prove to yourself, to others, that your fourth wing is real and worth using. But that pace is not sustainable forever. Here you begin to understand that flying is not a sprint. It's a lifelong movement, and if you want to keep going for the long haul, you need to learn the balance between push and rest, expansion and stillness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in the horizon is hover for a while. To pause, look around, and take in the view you once thought you'd never reach. But perhaps the most profound thing about the horizon is what it reveals about your relationship with yourself. When you've been flying with your fourth wing for a while, you start to see how much you've changed, not in a surface-level way, but at the core. You've built a trust in yourself that can't be faked or fast-tracked. You know now that you can listen to your own inner voice even when it contradicts the noise around you. You know that you can adapt to shifting air. You know that you can lose your bearings and still find your way back. And with that trust comes a quieter kind of courage, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's woven into the way you live. The horizon also invites you to give back. When you've learned to fly, it's impossible not to notice others still on the branch, their fourth wing tucked away. Sometimes they're watching you. Sometimes they don't even know you exist, but you see them because you've been them. This is where your flight becomes more than just your own. You start sharing what you've learned, not because you have all the answers, but because you know what it's like to feel that first restless stir. And there's nothing more rewarding than helping someone else find their lift. Here's the thing about the horizon, it never ends. No matter how far you travel, it will always stretch ahead of you. That can be overwhelming if you see it as something to conquer. But if you see it as an invitation, it becomes a source of infinite possibility. You don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to explore every inch of it. You just have to keep choosing again and again to move toward the places that call to you. Some seasons will take you higher, some will take you deeper, some will feel like a gentle glide, and others will challenge every ounce of strength you have. All of them are part of the flight. When I think back to that first version of myself, the one sitting in the cafe with a friend, unaware of the fourth wing folded tightly against my side, I wish I could reach through time and whisper, "You're not broken, you're not stuck, you're just not flying with all you've got yet, but you will." And when you do, the sky will open in ways you can't imagine. And I'd tell her the truth I know now. The fourth wing is never about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more of yourself than you ever dared to be. If you've read this far, you've already begun the journey. You've felt the stir, or at least the curiosity that says, maybe there's more for me than this. You don't have to find your fourth wing all at once. You don't have to have a perfect plan. You just have to be willing to listen, to move, to keep unfolding, feather by feather, until one day you realize you're in the air. And when the turbulence comes, you'll know it's just part of the ride. When the currents find you, you'll ride them with gratitude. When the horizon opens, you'll navigate with trust, because this is your flight, your sky, your wings.